But welcome everybody. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button.
I remember in middle school when you felt self-conscious if you were the last one to go through puberty. That really went topsy-turvy, didn't it?
Sometimes the Hasbara, it's too much explaining yourself and it's too apologetic.
Be sure to hit the notifications bell.
I actually do believe Israel won't just bomb countless civilians.
Be sure to tweet this out. Be sure to put this up on your Facebook.
You have to be kind to people. Being kind is the guys in this mess in the first place.
Put this up on your Reddit.
Chile is a country.
Be sure to cut and paste, a link to this to go into your favorite Facebook chat group.
It's good to see so many normal people in here.
Now, banking isn't just my deep, dark personal secret. It's America's deep, dark secret.
I've never seen it explained so simply anywhere.
Put this on WhatsApp. Put this on Telegram. Put this on your favorite messenger.
Hello, and welcome to the Untitled Anarchist Seagull channel. I'm your host, an Untitled Anarchist Seagull called Elise. And how is everybody doing tonight? I learned an important thing that probably everybody else already knew, but I didn't. You know how sometimes I spend several whole minutes scrolling through my reaction fodder playlist to find the stuff that I just added? Well, what I noticed today for the first time is that just above the videos of the playlist, there's a button that says Sort. And it allows you to select it so the newest ones come first. So, yeah, I don't know how I didn't notice that, but it certainly simplifies things now that I have. Now, I think we've got a very special JabroniCon today, because a jabroni who hadn't been heard from, thankfully, very thankfully, in a long time, decided to not see his shadow and made an appearance in Michigan. Bill fucking Clinton. If you're my age, you grew up on his bullshit. And if you're not, let me just give you a little summary. Okay, first of all, he murdered 1 million Iraqis by engineering a famine as part of what were called the sanctions of mass destruction. He is single-handedly responsible for a good deal of the poverty in this country because he got rid of welfare and replaced it with some bullshit that is nowhere near... I mean, the welfare system sucked to begin with. Compared, by international standards, it was not good. But it was better before Clinton got his hands on it. The reason you can do all these mass immigration roundups and things, that's a law that he championed called IRERA, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. And then he got other just wonderful things like the Mass Incarceration Crime Bill and... he also did some genocide in East Timor and actually disregarded Congress when Congress told him to stop doing genocide in East Timor. Because even they had decided it was way too much genocide for them. So that's Bill Clinton. And another fun fact is that he actually more or less single-handedly managed to take low-income voter turnout from 63% of the voter turnout being from people making less than $50,000 a year in contemporary values to that was in 1991 to 47% 8 years later. Like, this guy, I thought we were done with him. I thought even the Democrats had worked out that nobody wants to see this creepy, rapey, fucking mass incarceration piece of shit. But apparently, keeping up with the theme of making this current campaign something like the producers, somebody decided that what they really needed to do was send him to Michigan to try to convince pro-Palestinian voters that actually the genocide is a good thing. So I was thinking maybe have a little look at that. I mean, that's just such an ass blast from the past, after all. So I'm gonna start out with that.
So, please join me with
Chat, can I get a little fuck Bill Clinton? We can... Okay, I do not need machine-generated Arabic subtitles for this. For one thing, if it's machine translation, you can be fairly certain that it's garbage.
Welcome for President Bill Clinton, the 42nd President of the United States.
Like, why? Creepy motherfucker.
Thank you.
They're hoping that if they applaud loud enough, you'll think that this is over and just go home.
First of all, I'm so happy to be here.
That makes one of us.
I will never get tired of thanking Michigan for voting for me twice.
Michigan's to blame for that, is it?
And we thank you for saying that.
God, this motherfucker's voice.
And I love
I got enough of this in the 90s.
I love going all over the state. It's so different. And I'm honored to be here.
Wow, he knows there are different things in our state. He has such a connection to us.
With your
Hey, Riveroon.
Congresswoman, whose name I love, Hillary Clinton. You know, it's great. My Hillary and I just celebrated our 49th wedding anniversary.
Yeah, no, like, the only thing worse than this is actually reminding people that there is Hillary Clinton. Like, if Harris really wanted a bump in the polls, well, she should have just allowed her surrogates to announce that Bill Clinton was dead and insinuate that Harris had something to do with that. That probably would have gotten her over the line.
And she reminded me of, I think Gretchen Whitmer will always be a great governor. I said,
And this is coming from a guy who, one of his last acts as governor of Arkansas, was he took a break on the campaign trail because there was a guy by the name of Ricky Ray Rector on death row in Arkansas. He was really badly brain damaged, so brain damaged he did not understand anything about what was going on with him, which technically, under U.S. law, means it would have been unconstitutional to execute him because you have to be competent to be executed, which is like a sort of fucked up concept in the first place. Like, you have to be aware of the full horror of what's being done to you in order for it to be okay to do it to you. But in any case, Ricky Ray Rector was not. He was, Clinton took a break from the campaign trail. It wasn't really a break, it was a photo op that he did to go to Arkansas. And now, if you don't know Bill Clinton and you don't know this history, you might think that this would be a moment where a Democratic presidential candidate might say, it might grant clemency, since it's kind of fucked up that a guy who doesn't, who's so brain damaged he doesn't have any idea what's going on around him, is on death row. But no, he went over specifically to sign the death warrant for a guy who was so out of it that he literally saved the dessert from his last meal for bedtime. Like, that's fucking, so that's a little bit of Bill Clinton's performance as governor. That's the position he's judging from.
You know, we've been together for 49 years. I think I'm about to get the hang of it.
Well, does that mean that you're not doing as much sexual assault now?
And she said, "You're doing better."
Like, what the fuck does that mean?
And I thought that's a classic example of why women have an extra responsibility gene, as Sylvie always says.
Oh, fuck you with that bullshit. Because the idea here is, I mean, this is just another way that it's like, that responsibility for men's behavior is sort of pushed over on women. That's what that's all about.
And Gretchen Whitmer has it, and so does Kamala Harris. And I want to thank Bishop and Mrs. Burrow. I want to thank all the local officials that are here, Representative Will Snyder, Mayor Bonnie McLaughlin, thank you.
Wow, these subtitles suck.
County Democratic Chair Larry Jackson, Muskegon County Democratic Chair Jason Corella, and thank you to one of the first 3 governors who endorsed me when I started running in late 1991, Jim Blanchard. Thank you for being here.
Oh, okay, another person whose fault it is.
Yeah. So,
like, oh, you got, like, union workers here? I mean, this is the guy who brought NAFTA and the WTO into our lives and got rid of a lot of really good union jobs. I mean, sent union busting through the roof. Part of the reason there is such low union density in this fucking country is standing right there at the lectern.
I have been I spent 4 days in rural South Carolina, and 4 days North Carolina, and 4 days in rural Georgia. And I just spent a day going
What's with this fucking camera work?
around western Pennsylvania. And I'm going to be I think we're doing 5 stops here in Michigan today. And
Well, I mean, I like the idea of him stopping. I'll applaud for that. Woo!
When Vice President Harris called Hillary and me, and they've known each other for 30 years, but I've only known her for a few years. But she called me and she said, "I want you to help." And I said, "I'll be low maintenance. I don't care if I'm ever on television."
Yeah, in fact, I mean, really, the best way that he could help is by not being on television.
Former presidents are best for is going places where presidents don't show up all that often.
Except in a lot of those places, people are kind of thankful for that. Like, what's even more useless than a president showing up for a photo op when you're in the middle of your disaster is a fucking ex-president.
And sending a message to people that everyone deserves to be heard. And that whoever it is they're trying to help is making sure that they're heard.
Yeah, everyone deserves to be heard. See, that's a kind of a funny thing for him to say. I was just talking about NAFTA a second ago. See, the law on trade agreements in the U.S., don't know for sure if it's still the case, but at least at the time, required any draft before it was submitted for ratification to be examined and, receive the observations anyway of organized labor. And NAFTA is a huge document. I mean, with all the schedules, with all the appendices and all that shit, they gave the AFL-CIO 24 hours to go through this extremely long, dense document and give their opinion on the subject. That's everybody being heard.
So I like this.
Wow, that makes one of us.
But I do want to say that I decided to do this for only one reason. I don't want anything. I don't want an appointment.
I think that's a fucking relief.
You know what I want? I want to
A kick in the nuts?
assure the American dream for my grandchildren.
Like, his rich-ass grandchildren, I don't think have to worry about that. Like, what, is this his way of saying he's cutting him out of the will?
I don't want my 10-year-old granddaughter to have fewer freedoms than her 44-year-old mother.
Oh, well, talk to your wife a little bit about that, because, see, one of the other neat little things about the Democratic Leadership Council, which is that sort of Democratic Party think tank that brought us Clinton, that decided that we needed to have a Clinton. One of their big things was, at the time, they thought it was a real problem that the Democrats were seen as the party of things like civil rights for black people and abortion rights and labor rights and other extremely popular things. And Bill Clinton's mission was to make it no longer the party of those things. And part of the backsliding on abortion rights in the Democratic Party is very much down to Hillary Clinton.
Can you believe Chelsea's 44? And about to run in her 3rd New York Marathon.
Who gives a fuck?
I want that.
Like, I thought it sucked the way the right-wing media slagged off Chelsea when she was 12, but she's 44, she can fuck off. She's 44, and she has not had a single job where she wasn't trading on her father's name.
And I remember, I know this is in a place where there are a lot of members of the other party, and I hope there's some Republicans here today.
Yeah, he needs to have some friends in the audience.
But I was at former Congressman Walsh from Illinois yesterday, a Republican who's campaigning for Kamala Harris.
Like, this should concern people.
And I was reminded of the difference in Donald Trump's roots and Joe Walsh or Peter Lynn Cheney. Trump's father hired as his political organizer or guru Roy Cohn, who was Senator Joe McCarthy.
Okay, now do Lynn Cheney. Or Liz Cheney. I always get them confused.
Main advisor. And Roy Cohn was an interesting fellow. He was Jewish and he was gay, both of which are fine with me, but...
Well, thanks for that.
Roy Cohn...
I mean, let's remember... Oh, I forgot. His signature piece of, like, gay rights-related legislation, Bill Clinton's, was the so-called Defense of Marriage Act, which basically which banned federal recognition of same-sex marriage.
Ran campaigns against Jews and gay people. He was an anti-Semitic homophobe who was Jewish and gay.
Yeah. And now let's talk about how the campaign that won Nancy Pelosi her seat, where the whole thing was explicitly slagging off her opponent because he was gay.
But
hey, Hail Satine.
One constant message. Whatever they charge you with, deny it. Deny everything.
Well, I mean, he learned that lesson. Or
And
say it depends on what is means.
Always accuse other people of doing what you're doing. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, it sounds like the Clinton administration, actually.
I don't know about his time in business school, but Donald Trump would be a good student way home. Deny everything. Never admit error, ever. And accuse other people of doing what you're doing. And do it with energy and sanctimony. President Ford when he was in Congress, and even Ford was more than an acolyte of President Eisenhower, who finally figured out how to maneuver Joe McCarthy to his demise without wrecking the coalition that was...
Well, I mean, that wasn't hard. Like, Joe McCarthy's demise came because he decided to start attacking the top military brass, and nobody was standing for that.
His party. And when I was in school, we were all taught that Eisenhower, the great warning in his farewell address was that America should not build a military-industrial complex that runs the country to the point of getting involved in unnecessary wars and putting our democracy. Yes, that was like...
Yeah, about that.
our little lesson.
Does it really count? I guess it counts as a lesson even if you do the opposite.
But Eisenhower turned out left us another message, which I just discovered literally a couple years ago, everything he said about this. After World War II, he began to talk to his friends about how hard it was going to be to save American democracy.
I mean, that Eisenhower speech is actually remarkable for the fact that you could not imagine even the most left-leaning Democrat giving it today, because Eisenhower also went on a whole thing about how, you know, every bit of military spending is taking away from working people. That, you know, every bullet you spend money on, every bomb the government spends money on is taking away from the well-being of working class people and stuff like that. Now, imagine, even fucking Bernie Sanders has never really shown, I mean, not since the 80s anyway, has never shown any serious objections to the military-industrial complex and the way that it is used to prevent any kind of decent social spending.
And he said, I'm really worried about it. He said, we're already the longest-lasting continuous democracy in history.
Well, yeah, he would have, at the time he was speaking, that's an interesting thing to say, since, I mean, black people in the South didn't really have the vote yet. What's your definition of continuous democracy at this point? Because, see, to me, the very most basic part of that would be, if we're talking about, just sort of a, bourgeois formal democracy, would be universal suffrage, without which what you've got is a dictatorship for a significant segment of the population. And when Eisenhower would have been giving that speech, I mean, the U.S. was not yet even close to it.
But he said, it just requires so much effort for people in their lives. Look at the lives all of you had. He says, it's really hard to keep up with what's going on and to understand what's a real threat and what's not. And to vote.
Okay, you're fucking spying on somebody's fucking
he said, I just don't know how long we're going to make it. And
phone camera? That's a bit fucked up.
We always say to General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, we don't know how long we're going to make it, but we were fixing to lengthen our stay in the land of the free and the home of the brave. Look.
Okay.
Even if we close down here,
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, because I heard he actually got it. I mean, this is all introductory, just platitudes.
The reward talent. Number 3, we're all playing the game under the same. It's swept, at least. Now think about why we all like these contests and how we can talk about them. And I was president, and I think I'm entitled to my opinion about who'd be better. Okay. And so I want to make 3 brief points. You did pretty well when I was president, and I think I'm...
No. No, we didn't. The reason that actually low-income voter participation went down so low is because basically people making less than $50,000 a year at this point found that they didn't have a dog in the race because the Democrats were just screwing them. I mean, he took away benefits, which took the floor out of the wages, out of like the wage setting mechanisms, made it really easy to export jobs to low wage industrial platforms elsewhere. Yeah, he actually, the working class got screwed.
Entitled to my opinion about who'd be better.
Yeah, but you see, if you're so entitled to your opinion, I believe that you're entitled to your opinion, Bill, and that's why I think you should really just keep it to yourself so that you don't have to share your opinion with anybody.
I don't think it's right to say that people have to vote for Donald Trump because the economy is better there. I don't believe that.
Well, yeah, except, first of all, like, this motherfucker talking about the economy is a bit rich because he's a multimillionaire. The economy's always pretty good for multimillionaires in this country.
3, I think you owe it to the rest of the world and to your own families and to everybody in between to preserve the Constitution and keep us going forward. Now,
Well, what does that even mean? And don't bring the rest of the world into it. The rest of the world is see, I mean, this is one of those things where you can see just how completely the U.S. is sort of a propaganda bubble. Because this idea that the rest of the world just absolutely wants U.S. leadership and stuff like that is bullshit. Like, in most of the world, the U.S. is considered the leading threat to international peace and security when those polls come out. And that is especially the case in the places where the U.S. has the most prominent presence.
the authoritarian MAGA crowd has made it clear that
I think he said crowd, but the subtitles made crap out of it.
the definition of a good administration under Trump would be to fill every single position, from the Supreme Court on down to the cabinet on down, everyone, people who are unquestionably loyal. That is, when they ask you that old joke line, are you going to believe me or your lying eyes? You will.
Yeah, that was a very common joke line when talking about how working class people were doing in the 1990s in this country.
Always answer you, master. They've made it absolutely clear. And I think that is the
Yeah, they saw it, but that's...
because nobody knows everything. And the road clock is right twice a day. So we all spend our whole lives trying to get further away from the road clock and closer to being right all the time, and we'll never get there. And we need other people who have different life experiences, who have different,
Yeah, we need all kinds of different millionaires running things. We need oil and gas lobbyists. We need arms lobbyists. We need pharmaceuticals lobbyists, and we need agribusiness lobbyists. We need all of the lobbyists. Just a diverse coalition of industry shills.
Need that. And that's one reason I believe Kamala Harris will be a better president than Donald Trump. And don't minimize that. Don't minimize that. I was the second youngest person elected president and the third youngest to serve. Theodore Roosevelt was the youngest, and he was vice president, and President Kennedy was killed. And the first week I was there...
Yay! We can get a little applause for McKinley buying it.
All these great young people who worked my campaign. One of them, Gene Burley from Michigan, is behind that curtain.
I will admit, just a little embarrassing cringe moment from my history, that I participated in his first campaign. In my defense, I was 12, and it was a thing that a friend of mine's dad was taking my friend to, and I was asked to come along, and also I was 12, but I still find it a little bit embarrassing.
Yes. And he was an essential economic advisor to me, to Barack Obama, to Joe Biden, and to Kamala Harris. Where is he?
So, neoliberalism on steroids. Hello, Route Mouse.
This is, the deep state the Republicans are all trying about. I used to go running down the mall in Washington when I was young and Peter. And this young woman came up to me one day when I was running on the mall and started criticizing me because it turned out she was going out with Gene and she thought he was working too hard and unavailable for her. So I had to go home and I was properly chastened. Is rooted in your loyalty to the Constitution.
I'm just moving ahead because there was some other stuff that was that I saw.
That it's changed. For example, we had run deficits since 1969, and every year when I was running for president. And I said, look, this debt thing has got out of hand.
This is bullshit, though. Like, there's absolutely no reason not to run a deficit when you can literally print money.
With trickle-down economics, interest rates are too high. It's keeping middle-class incomes down. It's increasing poor people's problems, and we should run this economy from the bottom up, and this is how we're going to do it. Well, and I warned people, I said, to do this, if we're going to get rid of the deficit, we're going to have to raise some money, and we're going to have to...
No, like, that's, like, literally not how you do this. This is a ridiculous thing he just said. Like, the way that you do this is exactly the opposite, because what he's talking about is austerity. I mean, it's called austerity, but the term is a lie. Because austerity implies everybody's tightened their belts, whereas austerity, in this sense, refers to just a massive upward transfer of wealth.
Cuts and spending. And
the spending he cut was primarily spending on working class people.
It's going to be like going to the dentist without any painkillers.
Yeah, wait a second, like, this is wild. Because, like, Elon Musk was just talking about how the Trump economic policy is going to cause a whole lot of pain for people who aren't as rich as he is, but supposedly it will be worth it, which is, of course, bullshit. And it's a ridiculous line as well. And it seems like something that you wouldn't want to mention when you're, like, running for office or whatever. But this is, like, Bill Clinton is actually just right here saying that his version of helping the middle class, because we can't talk about the working class, of course, it's the U.S. political discourse, and we're not allowed to acknowledge they exist, was going to hurt them.
And you just got to be
willing
to do it. If you vote for me, that's what I'm going to do, because it's the right thing to do. And nobody likes it, but we've got to do it.
Well, actually, bond traders love it. Those are the people who are really worried about deficits and shit. Nobody else gives a fuck. It does not actually affect anyone's lives, because, again, the state can decide how much money there is.
To get the country's economy on. And you might remember that we got thumped in the midterms. And
yeah, because the people who were counting on Clinton to reverse all of the horrible Bush shit discovered that actually what he went in there to do was make it even worse.
In 1994.
I mean, Democrats pretty much always get thumped in the midterms when they're in the White House, because they have no way to pretend that they're going to do something good, because they're in a position where they have no excuses.
Because nobody felt it was happening.
It was
3 full years after we started bringing down the desks that people would say it was happening.
Yeah, yes, what was happening was mass unemployment, poverty through the roof, and millions of people in prison.
But my margin of victory in Michigan, for example, between 1992 and 1996, went from 8 to 13 points. So I did 5 better. But it took time. And I woke up in a cold sweat for 15 years. I swear I had mad dreams about all the people who lost their careers because they had to stand for election before people felt that.
Wait, those are the people he's worried about, not the people whose jobs were offshored as a result of NAFTA. You know, not the people who lost their only livelihood, their only lifeline when he abolished welfare with the so-called Personal Responsibility and Welfare Reform Act. None of that. He's worried about, he gets a cold sweat waking up thinking about fucking politicians.
the change.
The only, real people.
So, in the 2016 election, the economy was already roaring, but people didn't feel it yet.
Well, yeah, because the thing is, when guys like this talk about the economy, we're supposed to think that the economy is one big thing. And it's either good or it's bad. When, in fact, the economy is a bunch of competing interests. And so the economy can be roaring, certainly, but that usually tends to mean that working class people are getting screwed. Because the indicators that people look at to decide that the economy is good are things that mostly have to do with how well rich people are doing.
So they felt it in 2016, and there was Trump there to take the credit for something he never was for. And he is gambling that he can do it again. I'm telling you, if you mean that, then you need to get on the phone and you need to show up and you need to do all this stuff. Because I'm telling you.
Okay. There was supposed to be some stuff about Palestine in here. That's what I'm looking for.
Even some small-scale nuclear that I think is safe because these little tablets of pellets are covered in ceramic and will last for 100 years without damaging the ground. In the Biden years, I'll get rid of all of them. Now, that's a very big deal because it's important that we continue to be.
Oh, here we go. I found it. This is actually what I really wanted to see, because I've heard that this was some wild bullshit.
And I have to be careful what I say because there's only one president at a time, and none of us can get ahead of where we're going. But I think we're going to have to essentially start again on the peace process.
Oh, the peace process. Nobody who pays any attention takes that bullshit seriously, or has in a long time. Because it's bullshit. The term peace process simply means whatever the U.S. is doing. And the way it worked, in Clinton's day, is that there would be these endless talks between the Israeli government and the PLO and Arafat. And you would have these talks, and the Palestinians would have all sorts of concessions demanded of them at the same time as Israel was stealing more and more land in the West Bank. And, and absolutely nothing was fucking happening. Except that it was becoming basically impossible for Palestinians to have any kind of contiguous presence in the occupied West Bank. I mean, it's a complete bullshit. Fucking peace process.
I understand why young Palestinian and Arab Americans in Michigan are...
I mean, this is a thing the Democrats are doing. They're trying to act like this is only Palestinians and Arab Americans. The thing is, there aren't enough Palestinians and Arab Americans in the country to account for the level of unpopularity of the genocide in the U.S. This would not be an electoral issue of this magnitude if it was just people who had some sort of ancestral tie into, or family ties to the region. This is, the genocide is unpopular because millions of people who are not Palestinian or Arab American or Muslims also are looking at all this live stream genocide and saying, wow, this is absolutely unacceptable. This cannot be allowed to go on.
I think too many people have died. I get that.
I get that. First of all, too many people have died. Notice that framing. You see this a lot from, Democrats lately. The idea is that there was a right number of people to die. A non-zero right number. See, because, for any decent person, the right number was nobody.
But
And they really ought to, when fucking politicians say bullshit like this, they ought to be pressed. How many was the right number of people to kill?
If you lived in one of those kibbutzim in Israel, right next to Gaza,
Yeah, okay, next door to a concentration camp.
the people there were the most pro friendship with Palestine.
No, they weren't. This is bullshit. What he's saying here. I mean, yes, there were some peace activists, a term that does not mean as much as it is often thought to mean in some of these southern settlements. But actually, there are quite a few. But they are like the minority.
Two-state solution of any of the Israeli
So pro-apartheid.
communities were the ones right next to Gaza.
I mean, let's remember that we're talking about the communities that when the U.S. and Israel were carrying out massacres in Gaza over the past, 15 years now? Periodically, 2008, 2009, 2014, etc. They would get, lawn chairs out, go up to the nearest hilltop with some drinks and some snacks and watch the people getting bombed. That's these communities too.
And so then, the people who criticize it are essentially saying, yeah, but look how many people you killed in the battalion. So how many is enough for you to kill to punish them for the terrible things they did?
And notice he uses the word butchered, which is interesting. Because it's like he knows that if he uses the lie about the beheadings and stuff like that, he'll get called out for it. Because at this point, anybody who's saying that, any politician who's saying that, is just simply lying, because it is at this point established. That never happened. There are things that are just unsubstantiated. This one is conclusively refuted. But you could say butchered and just mean perhaps a lot of people got killed or something like that. But if you're going to say that, 1,200 people killed by both sides, including a substantial number of military personnel, constitutes butchery in the one case, then you do run into some difficulty coming up with the right word for 200,000.
That all sounds nice until you realize what would you do if it was your family and you hadn't done anything but support a homeland for the Palestinians, and one day they come for you.
One day they come for you. The Palestinians come for you. This is not what happened. This is just a fucking lie.
And
also, the Palestinians have a fucking homeland. It's called Palestine. They already had one. The issue isn't that they lacked one. The issue is that it was taken away from them.
Other people in your village, you would say, well, you have to forgive me, I'm not keeping score that way. It isn't how many we've had to kill.
Had to. Fuck you.
Because Hamas makes sure that they're shielded by civilians.
Okay, and this is also just a lie, of course. In fact, it's ridiculous, because on the one hand, they will talk about the tunnels and stuff, so they will acknowledge that actually there's a whole tunnel network that the armed resistance use, specifically in order to be away from the civilian population, because they're trying not to have civilians in between them and the occupation. But then, so they'll acknowledge that the tunnels are there, and then they'll just pretend that for some reason their armed resistance, just out of, sheer desire for self-harm, will just sort of hang out in unprotected areas with huge numbers of civilians that are going to be carpet bombed. Make it make sense, Bill. Make it make sense.
They'll force you to kill civilians if you...
That's bullshit.
...want to defend yourself.
Which, that isn't self-defense. Even if we were to accept the idea that states have a right of self-defense against populations they're occupying, which under international law they don't. They simply do not. This is not self-defense.
And look,
but this motherfucker, like, responded to an attack on a U.S. embassy someplace in the Middle East, I think maybe Saudi Arabia, by destroying virtually the entire pharmaceuticals industry of Sudan, killing like 18,000 people in one go. He has very special ideas about how many people it's okay to kill.
I worked on this hard. And the only time Yasser Arafat didn't tell me the truth was when he promised me he was going to accept the peace deal that we had worked out, which would have given the Palestinians a state on 96% of the West Bank.
96% of the West Bank. So not even all of the occupied Palestinian territory. Not even all of the occupied, the 1967 occupied territories, which is already a small fraction of the whole of Palestine.
And 4% of Israel, and they got to choose where the 4% of Israel was. So they would have the...
Oh, yeah, except that you call it a state, but it was not allowed to, like, have its own military or anything like that.
The same land of all the West Bank. They would have a capital in East Jerusalem. They would have...
And actually, okay, he's talking about the Taba agreements. And the Taba agreements ended when Israel walked out of them. I mean, that has to be what he's talking about. The talks at Taba in like the late 1990s, forget the exact year, where they really were close to a deal, and then Israel just said, fuck you, we're not doing this, because they wanted to continue stealing land in the West Bank and Gaza.
Yeah. I can hardly talk about this.
Well, yeah, I wish you wouldn't.
And they would have equal access all day, every day, to the security towers that Israel maintained all through the West Bank up to the Golan Heights.
The Golan Heights being part of Syria. And what do you mean equal access to? Like, who gives a fuck? Why should Israel have any access at all to those? After all, those towers are on illegally occupied territory. Why should Israel have any access to them at all? Like, what kind of... I mean, you acted like this is a fucking deal?
All of this was offered, including, I will say it again, a capital in East Jerusalem and 2 of the 4 quadrants of the old city of Jerusalem, confirmed by the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and
rejected by him.
And they said no.
Well, yeah, it's a shitty deal. First of all, this is a lie. But it's a shitty deal because, see, what we're supposed to forget in all of this is, of course, that the Palestinians don't have to negotiate for any of that shit because it belongs to them. Israel has no valid claim to any of the land he's talking about. I mean, the Palestinians don't get the Golan Heights. That belongs to Syria, but they're not asking for the Golan Heights.
And I think part of it is that Hamas did not care about a homeland for the Palestinians.
That's like literally their whole thing.
They wanted to kill Israelis and make Israel uninhabitable.
That is, I mean, it's funny because he started this thing by pointing out how, like, Trump is the kind of guy who accuses people of the stuff he's doing. And here is Clinton accusing the Palestinian resistance of the things the U.S. and Israel are doing to Gaza.
Well, I got news for them. They were there first. Before there was, their faith existed.
No, they fucking weren't. Like, shut the fuck up.
They were there.
Actually, you'll find that the Palestinians were there before Islam existed. Like, I mean, this is so ridiculous. He's trying to claim that Zionism is older than Islam. Zionism is like 150 years old. A little bit older than that. This is just wild bullshit.
In the time of King David, and the southernmost tribes had Judea and Samaria. But
what he means is the occupied West Bank.
the whole fight that you have seen played out was present in the beginning.
No, it wasn't.
For Israel.
That is... Well, what does he mean by the beginning? Is he talking about 48? Because, yeah. But if he's talking about, 3,000 years ago or whatever the fuck, no, it wasn't.
Two parties, Likud and Labor.
Oh, okay. Okay, and also... Okay, so he does mean 48. But Likud didn't exist in 1948. They were formed decades later.
Likud says, we want the whole West Bank because we had it in the time of David, and the heck with whoever came later would know that. Labor said, we will take what the United Nations has offered us. And
well, yes, plus more. And the thing is, the Labor Party in Israel has explained why it is that they actually managed to steal more land in the West Bank than the hardline right-wingers. Because then they point out that what they do is they do it quietly. People like Netanyahu and Smotrich, they make a point of being really loud about it and telling the whole world that they're going to do this. People's backs get up, and the Palestinians are ready to resist it, and there's international pressure and stuff like that, and they end up not being able to do as much as they would have done. Whereas, Labor do it quietly, do it, bit by bit, so internationally nobody really notices it's going on.
We will make a garden in the desert, and we will have friends, and we will work through it.
Make a garden in the desert? Fuck you. People were already living there. The garden was already there. All they did was take over other people's orange groves and olive groves and shit.
And they did. David Ben-Gurion. They're still fighting this fight today.
Yeah, it's funny how that works when you invade somebody else's country and expel people from it. It turns out that they aren't happy with you.
And so here's what I want to tell you. I'm going to do everything I can to convince people that they cannot murder their way out of this, neither side.
Fuck you, neither side.
You can't kill your way out of this. And
well, why don't you tell Biden that? Because he seems to think that you can. Because you have to remember that the thing that you're killing, that Israel and the U.S. are killing their way out of, is the existence of Palestinians.
They have to make a new beginning. But when I read that people in Michigan are thinking about not voting because they're mad at the Biden administration
for the genocide,
historic obligation to try to keep Israel from being destroyed, I think that's a mistake.
Okay, that is wild on multiple levels. First of all, that he's talking about a genocide, and this is the way he calls it, a historical obligation to keep Israel from being destroyed. For another thing, actually, Israel is destroying itself. The U.S., with all this military aid they're providing, has actually created a situation where Israel is wrecking itself. Their economy is falling apart. Their military has revealed itself to be an absolute fucking joke. Their society is falling apart at the seams. They got large numbers of people leaving the fucking country because the economy sucks, because they don't want to, be sent to the twin meat grinders of Gaza and Lebanon to commit genocide and probably get their asses kicked as well. So not only is this description just a lie and a euphemism for genocide, it's just not even true. Israel is wrecking itself right now. In fact, you have, fairly mainstream voices, senior generals saying, you know, if Israel keeps up like this, the state will fall apart within a year or two. I think that's overly optimistic, though I don't think he was being... though I don't think that he considers an optimistic scenario.
Because Donald Trump has shown what he wants. And I don't think it's... And he claims it's good for Israel, but I don't think it is. I think we still have to find a way to share the future. We cannot kill our way out of conflicts.
Motherfucker, I mean, like, that's all you did as president, was kill your way out of them. Created conflicts to kill your way out of them. In Colombia, and fucking, in Turkey, in Iraq, in Africa, in just the, Arab-Iranian region altogether, all over the place. I mean, this guy was a mass murderer.
But we do have to fight our way to safety. And make no mistake about it, we've got now Iran, a Shia state, the Hezbollah, a Shia sect.
Well, it's not a Shia sect. Hezbollah is a fucking political party, yes. It is overwhelmingly Shia, but they aren't a Shia sect.
The Houthis,
the Ansarullah movement,
Shia sect,
a political
now
movement.
With Hamas, a Sunni Arab operation, united.
It's Sunni Arab. Like, he clearly does not know shit about this. It's not Sunni Arab. It would be Sunni Muslim. And he seems to be saying that the fact that the rift that the U.S. worked very hard to create between Sunni and Shia in the region is actually being closed up. He seems to think that's a problem.
And thinking the only thing that we have to do is run every Jew out of Israel.
Which is not actually what any of them is saying they're doing.
And I'm sorry, but I'm not for that. I think that is wrong. It violates everything we've stood for.
It's also just not real. Like, I mean, this is just another example. He was just talking about, like, how Trump accuses people of the stuff that he himself is doing. This is fucking Clinton accusing the resistance axis of doing the thing the U.S. and Israel are doing.
And in the end, it won't be good for the Palestinian people. I'll never forget Arafat when he promised me he was going to take this deal. It worked out.
Like, who gives a fuck what he promised you? You have absolutely no right to say anything about it. Like, fuck you.
He always was fighting with Prime Minister Barack. I said, wait a minute. I said, you think I care about the Palestinian children?
No, I don't think anyone would think that.
And he said, oh, much more than the Arabs do.
I would love to get a citation on this quote.
He said, they only care about us when they need to blame America and Israel.
Oh, the Arabs as in the Arab states. Not the Arabs. The U.S.-backed Arab dictatorships in the region is what he's talking about.
There are people being upset in the streets. This is far more complicated than you know. And all I ask you to do is to keep an open mind.
Oh, shut the fuck up.
But Kamala Harris has said that she will try to negotiate an end to the violence, an end to the killing.
Fuck that. Like, all you would have to do is cut off the weapons. And also, an end of the violence. Like, who's doing the violence?
Peace process. And that ought to be enough. Okay.
And no, it really fucking isn't. Jesus Christ. Okay, he sucks. He still sucks. Okay, we got still a half an hour. Got a few other things to look at. But I didn't want to miss the chance to, like, have a go at fucking Bill Clinton. There's some loser box stuff. We've also got that Einat Wilf thing about where she's doing, like, turfing the Palestinians, talking about it's not about Palestinians, it's Palestinian ideology. We've got Brianna Wu. Says she didn't change. The progressive movement did. We've got Loserbox explaining what he would like people to believe the Majority Report gets wrong on what he calls the Lebanon conflict, i.e. the U.S. and Israel invading Lebanon. Ja, ich glaube, die meisten werden das gar nicht verstehen. Also ich glaube, du bist wahrscheinlich der Einzige, der das Video überhaupt verstehen würde. Also werde ich wahrscheinlich... Also wenn mal genügend Leute zusammen sind, die das Video ja auch verstehen, dann ist das eine Sache. Aber es macht ja eigentlich keinen Spaß, wenn ich auf ein Video reagiere und kein Mensch versteht, was da gesagt wird. And then we've got Loserbox on the dangers of left-wing anti-Semitism. Actually, I'm kind of curious what that bullshit's gonna be.
So, I got this email from Fascist Vegeta. It's quite revealing. He does this every now and then. He sends me emails. He sends me fan mail. He does these very generic, kind of like hate mail messages. But this one's quite telling because he's saying, he's saying when your dad executed unarmed civilian.
Oh, is Loserbox's father? Okay, I need to find out. I don't know what the lore here is. Okay, let's see. Okay, he's implying, I don't know if it's true, that Loserbox's father was one of the Israeli-controlled Lebanese fascist death squads. I can't find anything that confirms that or not.
He felt a moment of empowerment, just as he felt cowardly once he fled when PLO troops arrived.
Which is actually kind of, I mean, that's already getting the history a bit wrong, because what happened in Lebanon, and this is important to understand now, because you'll hear Zionists going, well, why don't the Palestinian resistance just surrender? And then everything will be cool. Well, that you got to go back to Lebanon the first time Israel invaded. Because the PLO said, because Israel was saying that the problem, officially their justification was that there had been resistance shelling from South Lebanon on targets in Israel. And so the PLO, wanting to avoid a bloodbath, said, okay, we'll leave. We will remove our armed presence from Lebanon. They publicly announced this, and they followed through, leaving the refugee camps in Lebanon completely unprotected. And Israel proceeded to massacre them. Israel does not accept surrenders.
He's talking about Sabra Shatila. He thinks my dad was involved in the Sabra Shatila massacre. But that means that...
Well, that was one of various things the Israeli-controlled fascist death squads in Lebanon did, but it is the most notorious, certainly.
He thinks the PLO arrived after the Sabra Shatila massacre.
Yeah, and he's wrong about that. The PLO left, which is why that massacre was able to happen in the first place.
Sure. Does he not even know anything about the thing that he's been rambling about for the last 2 years? Sabra Shatila happened after the PLO was evacuated from Lebanon.
Yes, okay, and I do have to say, he's got this one right. I mean, I'm nothing if not fair. That is better than expected. It is true. Like, the PLO did not arrive after. The PLO left before, which is the only reason that massacre was able to happen, because Sabra and Shatila refugee camps, along with the other Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, were completely and utterly undefended as a result of PLO troops leaving.
And then the Israelis falsely claimed that there were 2,000 people left in Sabra and Shatila, and that's why they sent the Christians in to go and get them. And the Christians went in, didn't find that many militants, and just killed a bunch of civilians instead.
Well, they didn't find any militants, which is precisely why they were able to do it. Now, I have to say, again, credit where credit is due, I was kind of... Usually you will hear, particularly from, like, pro-Israel people, and he is nothing if not a pro-Israel content creator, they will try to pretend that Sabra and Shatila was nothing to do with Israel, that these... First of all, one of the first things they'll do is they'll pretend it was just the Phalange that was there. This is important because the Phalange, while very closely aligned with Israel, were at least nominally independent. And Israel actually invested very heavily in maintaining this lie. Like, when they had the legislative inquiry into the massacre, they refused to allow any non-Israeli witnesses to give evidence. That was important because the Lebanese witnesses and the international witnesses in the nearby hospitals who took in survivors and wounded all pointed out that people were saying that people in the uniforms of the South Lebanon Army were involved, Sa'ad Haddad's people. And that matters because Israel openly acknowledged that the South Lebanon Army was completely integrated into their chain of command. So the South Lebanon Army is just automatically Israel.
And then this is when he said my dad left the country afterwards, apparently, but I guess he doesn't know. He didn't even know the timeline. He has no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah, this is the problem with Bad Empanada. Well, one of them. Because it's like when he actually knows about stuff, he actually, when he talks about stuff he knows about, he does actually quite good work. But then he insists on also talking about shit he doesn't know shit about.
He's been rambling about, he's been making this specific accusation at me for the last 2 years. He didn't even know what happened. He doesn't even know anything about the fucking country that he's talking about. And it's ironic because this guy is supposed to be like the history graduate, isn't he?
Yeah, it's like when he talks about Latin America, he makes a lot of sense. He knows what he's talking about. When he talks about certain other things, he's done good stuff on media analysis, and then he's got sort of a little sideline, especially on Twitter, and being kind of anti-Semitic, and also being really full of shit on all sorts of other stuff that he just does not understand anything at all about.
He's supposed to be the history. Did he have a PhD or was he just a graduate? I don't remember. I think he has a degree. But this guy was supposed to be the historical authority on this. He didn't even fucking know what the fuck happened in Sabra Shatila. What a fraud. His whiteness showing. He's also supposed to he does this thing where he learns Arabic words and says them on stream to try and impress his radical audience and shit. That's actually fucking politics. That's a white colonial Spain. Doesn't know what he's talking about. That's probably why he supports the axis of resistance, because he doesn't care about all the Arabs that they kill.
Well, it could possibly be that at the moment the axis of resistance are literally the only people trying to impose any consequences at all on Israel. Regardless of any other things they get up to, they're doing one thing that is absolutely right. And they're doing it quite well under the circumstances.
Bro, and he emails me shit like this every couple of weeks. It's just so funny that he just revealed his hand. He doesn't actually know anything about the whole point of that story. The whole essence of that story in detail. Everyone knows that if you're talking about Sabra Shatila, it happened because the PLO were gone. The people in those camps didn't have anyone there to defend them.
Yes, actually, he is absolutely 100% right on this. This is better than expected, let's put it that way. This is literally, and this is important to understand, because this is why nobody why no Palestinian takes seriously the idea that surrender is a safe option. Because Israel simply does not accept surrenders.
And the Israelis pushed people in there, they pushed the Christians in there, under the false premise that the PLO were still there, but they weren't.
Well, I mean, it's not really clear. The false premise, let's be clear on one thing. That was the public justification. That was what they told the media. There is absolutely no reason to believe that the SLA and the Phalange were seriously believing that there were armed Palestinian resistance fighters in Sabra and Shatila. The reason we know this is because the SLA and the Phalange had an unbroken track record of any time they came upon armed resistance, they would just run the fuck away. Israeli style. They would not fight, they would not engage, they avoided contact with any kind of armed resistance. They were absolutely cowardly. All they wanted to do was massacre civilians. So if you were to tell them that it's their 2,000, Palestinian soldiers in there, they wouldn't go anywhere near it because they'd get their asses kicked.
So it's like, it's not just that it's wrong, it's like it's painfully wrong.
It's actually wrong in ways that make it look better for Israel, actually.
Period. No, Badenoch is white. He's just incredibly white. I wonder if he typed this before or after his daily lashes. Since we're thinking of just meeting each other every day, Badenoch gets himself 40 lashes. He's obsessed with Badenoch. And I think it brings us quite seamlessly into what I want to talk about today, is you guys are probably following the Twitch apocalypse updates, because it's definitely helping interest you guys. It's actually gone so insane. So we've actually confirmed that Twitch had actually IP bans, but they banned everyone in Israel from making Twitch accounts. They didn't have an excuse. Well, they've been doing this for years as well. They've been getting away with it for a year. Meaning everyone in Israel, even if they're Palestinian, couldn't make a Twitch account. You couldn't make a new account. Now they said that it was only for emails, but it turns out people couldn't do it on their phones either, so they lied. They made one complete actual error, and it got community note as well. They also said that it was because of people posting war footage, gore and shit, but they never took down people from Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, well, I mean, that double standard is all over social media. It's why, it's considered, you used to be flagged for post concerns dangerous organizations if you said something about the neo-Nazi Azov battalion, or is it regiment now? I think it might be regiment in Ukraine. And then they removed that. And they also removed, any restrictions on calling for, violence against Russians and stuff like that. But in the case of Palestine, it's perfectly okay to call for the extermination of Palestinians. It's perfectly okay to, celebrate their genocide. But if you speak in support of the Palestinian armed resistance, if you even acknowledge them, then, let alone post images of, videos of their engagements, most of which actually are not really graphically gory. You really don't see, the most you see is occasionally in the sniper videos you will see Israeli goons falling. But other than that, it's mostly armored vehicles exploding.
Russia, Ukraine. And you know what's so sad about it is I was thinking, it's not even a boycott. Not really. Because the point of a boycott is you do it in public to encourage other people to follow through. Right? That's the point of a boycott. They didn't even really boycott. They did it quietly and didn't even announce it. So they weren't even trying to push up any kind of spur mass movement around that. They just fucking had it.
Well, I'm really surprised to hear that Twitch, a platform owned by Amazon, was not trying to spur a mass movement. I'm actually curious. I hadn't heard any of this, assuming that it's more or less true, which, I imagine it probably is. I would actually be interested in knowing their rationale, because one thing we can be fairly certain about is that fucking Jeff Bezos' companies would not be doing it because they support the BDS campaign.
And sending emails and going on Twitter and screaming into the void for ages, trying to get people to realized what happened to them, and nothing came of it. And obviously they've reversed it now immediately because of the embarrassment. And the damage control that they've done is quite impressive as well, because they banned a bunch of streamers, particularly for that panel, you know, the Arab to Sabra lover tier list panel. They banned a bunch of people from there, some of them shorter bans. I think Frogan got 30 days. They banned Frogan, they banned Denims, they banned that other Capri person. Yes, people in that panel. They banned Luffy the Houthi after unbanning him and rebanning him and unbanning him, which is fascinating because they banned people who did a panel show that picture proofed. Twitch hosted that panel with all their advertising watchers back on the screen. They banned people.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is also just the thing about Twitch. They're arbitrary as fuck. You can say things for months, then it's cool, and there's nothing explicitly in the TOS against it, and then eventually they just decide randomly they're going to permaban you. I mean, that's what happened to poly people. Skipping ahead a little.
Part of that Soviet propaganda in the other direction was that anything that undermined America, which they thought was the center of capital, was a good thing.
I mean, it is kind of the center of capital. And, see, I mean, I think more or less that is a fairly accurate description of, like, the kind of Soviet geopolitical line. But where's he going with this?
Even if it was massively hypocritical, even if they had their own leaders and their own allies who were massively racist, for example, as soon as the civil rights movement happened and there were pictures of unarmed, even under 18, like child, in some cases, protesters getting hosed down by racist Dixiecrat cops.
I mean, it's worth noting this goes well before the the 1960s, 1950s through 70s civil rights movement. There was a whole thing, actually, CLR James wrote about it. I mean, this is back in, like, the 40s. CLR James, Gone with the Wind. Yeah, here we go. Hang on. Okay, this might not be the one. CLR James. But, like, there was a whole thing in, like, the 20s and 30s where the Soviet Union had announced that they wanted to make a film about lynching in the South in the U.S. And they invited a bunch of black actors to come over to help make the movie. And at the same time, they were in talks with the U.S. government about recognition. And in the context of that, the U.S. said that they would not, they would frown on recognition as long as the Soviet Union kept on pointing out the horrible treatment of black people in the U.S. And so they shit-canned the idea for this movie. So all these actors who came all this way to Moscow to make this movie, were told this movie's not happening. We've decided against it. And they protested, and in Pravda and other party organs, the claim was that the black actors were, like, drunk and undisciplined or some shit. Rather than acknowledging that they had decided for, like, opportunistic geopolitical reasons that they were not going to do something about, not going to do this movie about lynching. Let me see. Hang on, where is it? Here we go. Gonna drop this in there. CLR James is well worth reading. I mean, his, like, articles on Marxist.org, quite worth reading. It's just, you find all sorts of just gems in there.
In the South, Fidel Castro would blast that. I think in Soviet media, actually, those Birmingham riots, not even riots, the Birmingham protests, where non-violent protesters were attacked by dogs and hosepipes. I think that there was a week where that made up a quarter of Soviet media.
Yeah, I mean, and let's just note, I mean, this isn't just a Soviet thing. The U.S. was doing the exact same thing, where anything any time there was any kind of repression in the Soviet bloc, whether whether it was the real thing or whether they actually had to exaggerate it or whatever, they would also, the U.S. media and the regime as a whole would go and suddenly rediscover human rights, and they would be like, yeah, I mean, look, they're just violating these people's fundamental freedoms, and of course, the Soviet Union would turn around and say, well, how the fuck can you be saying that when you've got all these lynchings going on? And this is where the term whataboutism came from pointing out U.S. hypocrisy.
1/4 of the output of Soviet media in that period was just about police violence against nonviolent protesters and the rights movement. And they would use it to push places like Cuba or other Soviet parts of Eastern Europe and all that as more like models of racial equality. So that's always been the first.
Well, I mean, like Cuba in particular actually is not a bad example of it.
Undermining the capitalist world, because if you're in the capitalist world, then you are opening up opportunities for the communist world to take roots. When the Soviet Union fell, obviously left-wingers found themselves at a huge disadvantage, to the point that they were basically willing to forsake everything they stood for, ideologically, in terms of economic values and everything else, just to hurt the expansion of capitalist Western interests. Even if it meant backing...
Okay, first of all, he's just assuming that leftists and Marxist-Leninists are, synonymous. I mean, when you had quite a few leftists, quite a few communists, who did not think highly of the Soviet Union, who are pointing out this hypocrisy he's talking about. Like, actually, I mean, again, if you read C.L.R. James, he talks about this in detail all the way back in, like, the 30s and 40s. So, like, just saying leftists, saying all leftists were just taking whatever the Soviet line was, is just nonsense.
Other Western capitalists,
hello, Emily. Yes.
Because all of the countries that they back now behave like capitalists, right? The CCP behaves in a very capitalist way. Iran being in a capitalist way. So,
I mean, the Soviet Union behaved in a very capitalist way, apart from the very first couple of years.
You have this situation where the left's foreign policy has become so broken and so powerless that they find themselves sacrificing everything they hold dear to back Islamic fundamentalist regimes.
Well, this is not exactly accurate, because the thing is, it's one thing, you can back somebody, you can say somebody is doing the right, like, for example, in this video, I pointed out that Loserbox was quite right about a lot of what he said about Sabra and Shatila, and the fact that the PLO, and that Bad Empanada was just totally wrong on the chronology of the first Israeli-U.S. invasion of Lebanon back in the late 70s, early 80s. I pointed out that he got that absolutely right, with a few caveats. Does that mean that I'm a Loserbox stan? I think I can fairly easily be acquitted of that charge. I don't think anyone would make it. It's the same thing with lots of other things. It's like, you don't have to agree with every single thing that, the Ansarullah movement does, or that with every single policy of Hezbollah, or, the Islamic resistance movements in Palestine, or whatever, to say that there are certain things they are absolutely right about. It is possible to do that. It is possible to say, yeah, I disagree, there are certain things that they're absolutely getting right, and there probably are also things I would disagree with, but there's certain things, like, for example, I mean, same thing, let's talk about the Soviet Union again. I don't have a lot of time for Stalin. Not a fan, not a Stalin fan. Being an anarchist, you might be shocked to hear that as an anarchist, I'm not a big fan of Stalin. But one thing I will hand the Soviet Union under Stalin, and I don't think this can be primarily attributed to Stalin, just to be very clear. I think pretty much anyone who was running that country at that particular time would have done in this particular respect the exact same thing. Kicking Hitler's ass was a good thing. That was a good thing that they did. The idea that only Stalin could have done that is nonsense. Like, literally nobody has ever successfully invaded Russia from the West, no matter who's running the place or how it's being run. because it's just too fucking big. But yeah, so that doesn't. So you can say liberating Auschwitz and the ghettos and everything was a good thing the Soviet Union under Stalin did, at the same time as saying, yeah, actually, on the whole, not a fan. You can do that. So, like, acting like saying that joining the Palestinian resistance in imposing a cost on the US and Israel for the ongoing genocide, which he denies, it's worth remembering, he denies it's a genocide. He's a genocide denier. Denies the most visible genocide in the history of genociding people. You can say, just because you say that they're doing that, absolutely right, that there's really no notes on that, doesn't mean that you necessarily agree with anything else that they're doing. But what he's doing is acting like you can't say it's good that these people are, like, trying to impose a cost on genocide, you know, without agreeing with every single other thing. And the reason that liberals like to do this is because they want to get you to just be sort of denouncing official U.S. enemies. It doesn't really matter. Like, I mean, the U.S. doesn't give a fuck about, you know, human rights in any of these places or whatever. They don't care. I mean, one of their closest fucking client states is Saudi Arabia, the most reactionary state on the planet. They clearly are very flexible on the subject of, like, basic human rights. But the idea is to put people on the defensive and force them to spend time denouncing the official U.S. enemies, when all they're saying in the first place was it's good that the Palestinians have allies who are willing to actually put their money where their mouth is.
In places like Iran, or in Lebanon, or in Yemen. That's what campism is, yes.
No, that is not what campism is. In fact, campism comes closer to what guys like this do, where basically their default is the, you know, to follow the geopolitical alignment of the state that they're in, without first actually questioning whether that's a good thing, or whether they agree with any of it, or even understanding exactly what that geopolitical alignment really looks like on the ground. Saying that it is objectively a good thing that there are people imposing a price, degrading the Israeli military, making sure that genocide is not a zero-risk activity, that is not campism. That is just, like, being against genocide. And that, for most of my life, my understanding was that was, like, a kind of a baseline thing that anyone who wasn't just a straight-up Nazi would at least rhetorically be against. But now it turns out it's fucking... Now it's complicated or some shit. But anyway, what's not complicated is it is time for me to wrap up for the night. I will be back at 11:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time tomorrow. And we can continue this, or we can look at something else when the JabroniCon resumes. Let me just drop the link for the Discord for anyone who's in chat and is not yet in the Discord, would like to join, where we can keep in touch in between streams, and you can make, like, suggestions if you have ideas and stuff like that. I also post my writings and things, and it's the first place where you'll be notified if I've got a new video. And also, if you like and subscribe, that would also be very much appreciated. I am also working on the first English translation of the works of Inessa Armand, an early Soviet feminist thinker, actually the very first head of the women's section of the Bolsheviks in the first couple of years of the Soviet Union, whose work was basically suppressed under Stalin and never got translated until now. And if you go to my Patreon, you can read the draft translations of 35 of her 37 essays and speeches. I've done quite a lot of work there, and if you'd like to support the project, that is always very much appreciated with a little donation by joining my Patreon or a one-off to my PayPal. Always very much appreciated. See you tomorrow. Thanks for joining me, and